Voice of San Diego. Hi, everyone. Welcome to Voice of San Diego at Home. My name is Kayla Jimenez. I cover North County for Voice of San Diego. And in recent weeks, I've been talking to youth activists in North County who started demonstrations for Black Lives Matter and against police brutality issues in their communities. And many of them told me that they started those demonstrations and gathered people together and let them know about what they were so passionate about with the racial issues going on in their communities. And in response to George Floyd's murder in Minneapolis by a white police officer. And they told me that they were bothered by the silence in their communities and how they would go to San Diego and see all these protests going on and so much political action, but then came back to North County and didn't see that there. And so they talked to me about changes that they wanted to see now in law enforcement and their local schools. So I brought them on today to talk more about what they're doing now and their motivations behind these protests in various locations in North County, including Poway, Escondido, and a few other places. You can put them on screen. So this is Patrick Ryan from North County for Racial Justice, correct?
That's right. That's me.
And then Simran Jain is a youth activist in Poway with Poway Black Lives Matter. And she helped organize one of the protests in Poway a few weeks ago. So I just wanted to start, the reason why this kind of came on my radar that so many youth activists were starting this in North County was my connection with Kristin Mcmillion, and she is another youth activist in Poway, and she goes to school in Escondido. And she organized she said she went to one of the protests in Poway and arrived late and everyone had dispersed. And she said she didn't want to wait for someone else to start another one, so she wanted to start it on her own. And at that event, there were about 150 youth activists who sat in a circle and talked about changes they wanted to make in their communities and demands for racial justice and changes in law enforcement. And she told me that she noticed a big spark in youth political activism that she hadn't seen in Poway. So I kind of want to, Simran, I know that you also went to a protest in Poway, so I wanted to talk to you about that and what motivations you're seeing now and with the Black Lives Matter movement and what changes you're hearing from various youth.
Yeah, so I'm definitely seeing, like, as time goes on, I'm seeing people are realizing that, like, we have such a large minority not a large minority population, but we have a minority population that needs to be acknowledged that hasn't been acknowledged yet. And especially through education, there was somebody who started an Instagram account, I think it's called Black and PUSD, and like basically they're just posting stories of minorities in Poway Unified that have felt like this discrimination. And like just even going through the stories, like over 60% of them are from Poway High, and it's spread within 5 schools. So you wonder, like, living in a community where, you know, the N-word is a normal thing to say, Confederate flags are normal, blatant racism is just there all the time. Like, people are finally realizing that this is super abnormal and like it's something that we need to see change in, especially with teachers. We're seeing stories about teachers just being blatantly racist and students just play along, and that's just how it is. And so the fact that we're not hearing from our elected officials about this kind of thing is super concerning because, you know, they're seeing people come out every single day. Like I go to like maybe 1 to 2 protests every day, and like the fact that I'm not hearing from my own mayor about anything is really frustrating because people seem to be focusing on like, oh, they're making traffic slower. Oh, you know, they're causing me some kind of inconvenience. And that's not the point. The point is that people have been struggling, especially in Poway. Minorities have been so hurt. Like we have maybe a 3% Black population in Poway, and like every single one of my friends that are Black have been called the N word with the hard R plenty of times, and that's just not okay.
Mm-hmm. I remember you mentioned that you were especially motivated because you had been racially profiled in Poway. Do you want to talk about that?
Oh yeah, so it's really concerning because I think this was like my senior year, and I was just in a car with my friends, and my friend was driving, and he like, I guess he didn't full stop at a stop sign, and the officer, like, he pulled us over. He had his hand on the gun the entire time, and he like, when I remember when we were like there, he just like, he kept asking us questions, and like afterwards I looked some stuff up, and I was like, okay, I don't know why he was asking all these questions. This isn't normal. And then afterwards, when we started pulling away, there was like another couple of cop cars behind him. So like you wonder, like, did he call for backup on, you know, 5 minority teenagers in a car going from the beach to Wendy's? Like, that's super concerning. And just 2 days ago, we were pulled over for literally no reason on the freeway. Like, my friend was going maybe 75, and we got pulled over, and it was just like, it's really frustrating because I think the stats came out a couple weeks ago, and minorities get pulled over 206% more than people that are white. And so that's just like, when you see a statistic like that, you can't help but wonder why. If it isn't racism, what is it? So yeah.
Mm-hmm. One more thing that stood out to me that you said was your desire to not make the demonstrations comfortable for the white community in Poway. Do you want to expand?
Yeah, for sure. So we have with the Black Lives Matter movement, they've kind of long stood with the idea of defunding the police. And now, like, for example, when I was writing like a couple words to say at the Poway protest, some of the people that were planning it with me were like, oh, I don't know if we should be saying defund the police. And I was like, I don't know if I should be shaping my language to make other people more comfortable. So like, this movement is about Black people, and it's not okay, as you know, even like for me, it's not okay for me to go and use language that makes me more comfortable rather than what the movement stands for, because this isn't our movement. And we're here to support them, and if they want us to defund the police, they want it for a very clear reason. It's worked, and we have the data to support that defunding the police works. And like, an example of that is literally just suburban areas. Like, we spend more money on resources for our community, and we need less police. And so making the movement comfortable is not something that we need to do, because it's already so comfortable for white people. Like, the world is created for white people. It's not created for our Black people of color, you know? Like, so this movement is about our Black community, and we need to remember that no matter what, because it's not made for us to be comfortable.
Mm-hmm. Can you tell me about what your group is pushing for in schools at Poway Unified?
Yeah, so right now we had like a list of demands, but basically a lot of people are tagging onto that, and what they want to see is they want to see education just being changed in a way that doesn't focus on, you know, just Eurocentric education and white education. And so we want to see education about like the war on drugs. We want to see Black people get shown as people that create, rather than just, oh, it's Black History Month, like, let's have a Black person of the week, which was literally something that was going on at Poway High. Like, we would only learn about Black people during Black History Month, and there would be like a Black person that we would learn about, which is just, it's so wrong, because it should be integrated into our education. And so pushing for a graduation requirement that has something to do with like a cultural class is super important to us, because the fact that I could have gone through my entire education without hearing from any other perspective other than, you know, the white person in the United States is really frustrating. And that's why we continue to have these racist attitudes, is because people literally do not know any other way.
Yeah, that's a good point. I talked to Kristin earlier from Poway, and then Grace Lashley, who may jump on, and she's from Escondido and goes to high school there. And that was also one of her big concerns, was that she didn't feel like the education she was receiving in her history or government classes were enough that were accurately reflecting the Black experience and Black history, and then government courses weren't enough to help people get politically involved. What challenges have you faced while getting more politically involved now?
Yeah, so there's definitely been a lot of backlash, especially from Poway. I like first got involved with activism like junior year of high school, and I remember like receiving death threats because of the things that I wanted to like accomplish. And elected officials have really never taken us seriously. I literally remember having a meeting with Steve Voss when we were talking about gun control, and he had his feet up on the table. And when we asked what he was going to do to protect our schools and keep us safe, he said, how about we put a giant sign in front of the school that says our teachers are armed, without actually arming them. So statements like that is just so frustrating, because we are here and we're trying to make a difference, and we're trying to show the elected officials that we're here to stay. And like, we're doing this even through policies. Like, I should not know how to make policy, but I do, because that's what's been pushed on me for my community. And so the fact that our elected officials aren't listening to us is just so frustrating. And sometimes I'll post stuff like, hey, let's not, racially profile all Muslim people as terrorists. And people will be like, why not? And I'm like, I don't know, seems kind of wrong to me. Like, it's so frustrating having to say something that should be accepted, and it being seen as super radical.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm glad that you brought up the conversation about school shootings, because I talked to Yusef Miller from the Racial Justice Coalition a few days ago, and he is from Escondido, and he was talking about how his group has been organizing for quite a while. And in commenting on the youth, he mentioned that the spark in youth protest and organization really stemmed from March for Our Lives against mass shootings in 2018, which kind of brought it back to what it is now. But yeah, Patrick, I want to kind of introduce you and talk a little bit about what's been going on in North County and what your group is doing, because I know it kind of hops on to what Simran was saying about youth activism and quiet responses from people in North County.
That's right. So yeah, my name's Patrick. I've been organizing with North County for Racial Justice. We kind of just started up. It was a group of maybe like 4 or 5 of us. We all went to the rally in La Mesa. We came back into Vista afterward, and we were like, what's going on? Like, we have the power, we have the almost like the responsibility to organize and build community. And sure enough, we've just been we've been kind of blessed with so many like connections of already local activists, and kind of what our group is really doing is kind of connecting the dots and filling a void of like youth activism in North County as far as organization goes. I think there's a lot of people that want to be involved and want to be active, but the way the systems have, operated from, an early age, like, you don't learn about, like, for example, like, you don't learn about like any local government issues. You don't learn how to participate in local government throughout your education. And until you get to the point when you're like 21 and you're 18, you're 16, you're frustrated, and you're like, what do we do? Like, I want to do something. So my group is kind of helping answer that question. Like, what do we do? What do we do that we're upset? What do we do that we know Black Lives Matter? Like, how do we reflect that into our community? How do we reflect that into our policy? And how do we make our local government officials listen to us?
Tell me what your group is talking about, how that would look like as a change in the community and in local politics.
So I guess as far as what we're like focusing on the politics of Vista specifically right now, because that's kind of where the biggest void is. And we also believe that Vista has a really, really good chance of like making significant changes to their local peacekeeping measures in the next, basically in the next year, due to the certain candidates that are like, there's one really amazing, strong council member on the board right now, and we're looking to have another really 2 amazing council members this November. And with them pushing, and with all the other local activist groups that are in North County right now, I feel like Vista really could be kind of the forerunner for setting a new example of peacekeeping. So we're focusing a lot on Vista politics. We also are like, helping unite and guide our local activists in like Carlsbad and Oceanside, and helping them focus on like, okay, like, you want to defund the police, but how do you get your council members to hear you? And what do you do when your council members decide to not do anything after they hear you?
Tell me about the push for defunding the police. And we talked a little bit about the differences there would be, for example, in Vista than in Carlsbad. Can you tell me a little bit about that?
Yeah, so actually, I had a phone interview with Dave Myers, who was one of the he ran to be sheriff in 2018 against who is now the head sheriff of the whole San Diego County Sheriff's Department. It's Gore now, and Gore's like super like he just doesn't see the cause. He thinks it's all kind of a joke. This is this is all information I got from Dave Myers, who's really awesome. Still a cop, I will say, but really awesome, progressive-minded as far as policy goes. And we had an interview with him yesterday talking about just like how the sheriff's department operates. What do these contracts look like? We learned about like he was open about candidly talking about like sheriff department policies, and like they have a lot of little like really racist and systematic ways of oppressing that like are basically just endorsed by like and normalized by them, and it has been for years. Like a good example is like the multi-housing or the crime-free multi-housing project that they do, or no, crime-free multi-housing program that they do, where it makes it so like if you are an apartment complex that is like under the jurisdiction of the sheriff's department, essentially like if you have the cops called into your apartment complex for maybe 6 times that year, if you are the person who needs to call them the 7th time, you are potentially at risk of being evicted, because that's like the way this program works. And the goal is to, reduce police presence, but it really is just kind of making it so people that need to call the cops and can't, people who suffer from domestic abuse, see people who like really could, people with like mentally ill family members that already kind of don't want to call the cops, but kind of in situations where they need to, they kind of don't have incentive to, because they could lose their house. And, and that is directly affecting like our minorities and our most disenfranchised people in like low income housing. And so I was just learning little things like that. Like, that isn't a program in Carlsbad. That's something that is the sheriff's department. So we've been learning things like that. And so when we say like defunding the police in San Marcos and Encinitas and Vista, we can, you can use statistics and data on programs like that to explain why you want to defund the police and what that means when you say defund the sheriff's department in the city of San Marcos and Vista. We don't want them doing that. We don't want people in mixed status families with undocumented family members to feel scared to call the sheriff's department in the situation of domestic abuse or drugs or, violence and things like that. So I guess that's kind of what we've been really focusing a lot on, learning and empowering other groups to know.
Mm-hmm. I know that you mentioned that you were talking to traditional groups who organize in North County to kind of get some guidance for your group and other youth activists that you're getting together with. What kind of advice have they given you, and what have you learned from them?
Biggest thing is that it's a long, slow process, and then like the work is never over. That's like the biggest things that I've been learning from them, and most daunting, but also the most inspiring. And I've been really one of the groups I actually saw them yesterday. I helped them with an event in downtown San Diego doing security. They go by Central Universidad Popular. They're based out of Vista. They're in like people that I'm in relation with that help with them also work with Pillars of the Community and Alianza Comunitaria. And they've been like just mentoring us on, how to like how to turn that passion and how to turn like, you know, a protest, you know, how to turn like 100 crowd protest into like a statement that really could make like policy change and really could make budgeting changes. And it's been really, you know, I guess the hardest part is really that translation of like grabbing the emotion that you can get at a protest and turning that into people voting and turning that into like, you know, like I think like Simran said, turning that into like a policy that is essentially being written by regular people. And I guess that's the hard part, just making it tangible and kind of having to speak the political language.
Mm-hmm. Got it. One thing I wanted to touch on, since I know you both have been to quite a few different protests in North County, I want you guys to can you explain what you're seeing there? And now, are things dying down? I know this weekend, today is June 15th, which is the freedom of slaves and anniversary of freedom of slaves in America. I know there's a lot of things happening today, but I kind of want to see what you guys are seeing now. I'll open the floor.
I can start. Yeah. So, when we first started off, I mean, obviously there was like a lot of people. Everyone was super excited to get on the ground. And I think thinking from the police perspective, their tactic was probably to scare us off, which is probably why, like in La Mesa, for example, they tear gas people, shot them with rubber bullets. And then they did that in downtown, both of the protests the next day. And I do want to say it's super frustrating to see, like, I went to La Mesa and I went to downtown, and I've been going to the protests after that as well. And I can see that in La Mesa, when they were burning buildings, no cops did anything. But when we were peacefully protesting in downtown, we got tear gassed. So I think they're trying to kind of push the narrative that we're violent and we're doing these like really awful things. But people are just being so peaceful. And like, the one thing I want to say is it's important not to stress peaceful protest, because it's not how we're protesting, it's what we're protesting for. And for me personally, I would say, like, if there are protesters that want to do something that I am not comfortable with, that's too bad. Like, I have to stand behind them and I have to go with them, as long as it's a Black person that's doing that. And we're not seeing that many Black people looting. We're not seeing Black people setting things on fire. We're seeing, you know, white like anarchists, and nothing against the white anarchists as a whole, but there are definitely some really radical ones that are making it a huge problem. And so because of that, I think people are getting a little scared, and they're starting to like not show up to protests, and they're doing their, you know, one social media post a day. Now I've, you know, done my whole thing. So you know, the whole translation of activism to social media is definitely frustrating, but I'm not seeing it go down yet. Like, I'm definitely still seeing protests every day, 1 to 2 protests. So hopefully we can keep that rhythm going.
Yeah. Patrick?
I'm seeing a lot of solidarity, and you know, I feel like, you know, what I've been learning from these older activist groups is that, like, you know, as far as like people, how often people want to participate, that does waver because life happens, and you know, you got to go to work, you got to feed your family, you got to pay rent, you got to go to the doctor, you know. But or even just like, you know, it doesn't seem like, oh, like I went to a protest last week, you know, I don't need to go this week, you know. Like, a lot of people have that mindset and mentality. And so like the amount might waver, but I think what I'm seeing personally that's like really sticking out to me is seeing the amount of solidarity from different members of the community all across the board. And like I went to a rally yesterday, or I did security at a rally yesterday held by Pillars of the Community in downtown San Diego on the waterfront. And while there wasn't like it wasn't like an outrageous amount of people, it was very, you know, kind of on the smaller end of a protest. But the type of crowd that was there, I mean, they were there celebrating, you know, the announcement of the Supreme Court, you know, not allowing Trump to revoke DACA. And they were just like, they're speaking of like how, yes, it's a big celebration, but it is not like the solution. There's so much work to be done. And, you know, they had Latino voices from our community. They had dreamers. They had like Black voices from our community. They had Indigenous voices from our community. They had Jewish voices from our community. They had like, you know, white Christian voices from our community, all speaking the same message of like that we are in this fight against oppression and like white supremacy together, and that we've been in this fight. And that solidarity is the biggest thing that I'm seeing and one of the most inspiring things to me.
Got it. I have a question from the comments. Rosie Rosa says, how can my daughter, who is almost 16, participate? And I'll open that up.
I guess I feel like as a young person, your voice is really powerful because, you know, it's inspiring because, you know, if you start speaking up as a 16-year-old, what like all the other 16-year-olds around you are more inclined to speak up. And that starts a conversation that like maybe wouldn't happen until somebody was like, you know, 18 to 25, might start at 16 for like a whole group of 16-year-olds. And that alone is like revolutionary.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. Just having conversations and doing some of your own research, maybe like getting some books or watching a couple movies, reading from some famous people that were Black, you know, about their experience, I think is very important. So other than that, like there's so many ways to participate, even like when it comes to these protests. Like I understand like my parents don't want me going out. I am like, they don't know I'm going out, but like, you know, I got to do what I got to do. But like, if you are not comfortable with your daughter going out, then that's completely fine. There's so many other ways that she can be helping with these protests. Like, even if it means like you know, go in your car and you pick up like a case of water and you go put them in your trunk and open your trunk for protesters. Like, there's so many things you can do to help. And it's great to see that there are so many options to help.
I know, Simran, you touched on this, and I connected with you both on Instagram. As social media has been a big use of gathering and organization in a way that I don't think I've ever seen before. So that's another way. Do you have any comments on that at all? I know, Simran, we talked about TikTok a little bit yesterday.
Yeah. So we're just seeing, obviously we're seeing like a lot of really big, like mainstream news sites just not really tell the whole story. And that's frustrating for, you know, the youth activists on the ground who are, you know, seeing these news stories and then seeing what they saw at the protests and comparing them, and they're completely different stories. So, like social media has become such a tool because you can just, you know, with the metadata thing, you're not supposed to be posting pictures, but you can like screen record a picture, hide faces, and then post it. And you can just see like all this really awful stuff that's happening that the news isn't covering. Like a couple days ago, we were protesting in, I think it was like Mira Mesa or something, I don't remember. And we saw some cop cars go by that didn't even have a license plate. And I was just like, that doesn't really sit right with me. And so we recorded that and then somebody posted it. So that's how we're getting information out. Because obviously, like as an 18-year-old, I don't work at a news station. I don't have access to like putting things on the TV. So when I put things on TikTok, people can see them and they can repost them, share them with their friends. And then like 4 days later, I'll see them on the news and I'll be like, oh, I saw that a couple days ago on TikTok, which is really crazy.
Right. Patrick, any thoughts on that? I know that your group is organizing through Instagram as well.
Yeah, Instagram has been so powerful. Like getting people, we've got like literally off of like one post the other day, we had 100 people call into a city council meeting. And it's just like, it's outrageous. And like, we're a relatively new Instagram account. If we had like double the following, we could like easily pull so much more. And that is like kind of unprecedented in history, being able to do that.
Right.
And so I think it kind of like, it's just that access to information, that access to like that empathy that is associated with it as well. And yeah, I think all in all, it's a very like powerful tool for the revolution. Really awesome thing to have. But yeah, and getting information out, of course, too, because, you know, every news site says they're like objective news, and it just, you know, it's just one's doing one thing and the other one's doing this, and it's really confusing and polarizing. But, you know, if you have friends or people that you know that live in Seattle and you see cops attacking protesters there, and if you on their stories, and then you see, you know, friends in San Diego who are being attacked by cops in their stories, and in Portland, and in, you know, in Atlanta and in New York, then it's like, oh, like shoot, maybe like where's this on the news? Because it's definitely happening.
Got it. Yeah, I appreciate you both coming on to talk about this. Is there anything else that you feel is important to know for our viewers to know about what's going on, or anything that you're doing coming up?
We're kind of planning some big action right now around the 4th of July, and I don't have too much more information, but we're getting in it's gonna be a coalition with like all our other local activists and organizers as well. And in the meantime, we're doing something on Go Skate Day in Vista. That's kind of like more of a community building event, because I feel like any real change that's going to happen in our local politics is going to be grassroots and from our communities.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. Yeah, it's so important to realize that like we're fighting a system that's against us right now. And so I love when people go and vote, and I always exercise my right to vote. I'm always out there trying to get people to vote. But it's important not to just reduce our impact to voting, because, you know, voter suppression is still real, and our, you know, people that were in prison, like so many of them can't vote. And you can't help but wonder, like, why can't they vote? Like, that kind of seems unfair that they can't vote in their own government, make their decisions, you know? So we need to be out there, and we need to be protesting, and we need to show the officials that like we're not leaving until we get what we want, because this is our country, and they're there to work for us, and until they actually work for us, like they don't get to have that job.
Mm-hmm. Rosie, who asked about her daughter, asked if you guys would share your Instagram account so she can follow along. Do you want to tell people where they can follow you or get updates about what you're doing?
Yeah, so actually, my Instagram account our group's Instagram account is North County #4 Racial Justice, and you could find us on there. You could DM. I'm one of the persons that answers the DMs a lot of the time. There's maybe like 4 of us that manage the Instagram, and if not, like email also works. We do North County for Racial Justice @gmail.com. That's also great. We're also on Twitter and Facebook, although we are less active on Twitter and Facebook.
I'm on Instagram and every single social media site as S1MRANJA1N. So it's just my name, and instead of the I's, it's ones. And I just post a lot of information about protests. I also have a group chat on Instagram if anybody wants to join, that we're posting every single protest that every single one of us is ever seeing online. So if you want to join that, there's that too.
Great, I appreciate you both. And I mentioned before, I had written a story with Patrick and Simran, and we talked before, and then Kristin Mcmillion and Grace Lashley, who are Black teen high schoolers in Escondido and Poway, who also talked about their experiences planning protests and pushing for racial justice changes in law enforcement and public schools in their communities. And I'll be continuing to cover this and keeping in touch with you both, and I know I'm getting connected with a few other teen activists in the region. So I appreciate you both for joining me and then talking about what you're doing now.
Yeah, of course. Thank you for having us.
Yeah, thank you for having us, and happy Juneteenth.
Yeah.